We are continuing our Big 12 Blitz series on the Wildcast, Tucson.com, and the Wildcaster mobile app. So we heard from the voice of the Kansas State Wildcats. Now it's time to hear from the insider of the Kansas State Wildcats, and that is Tim Fitzgerald from 247sports.com. Tim, thanks for being a part of the Big 12 Blitz.
Thank you. I've got my wrong backdrop up. I didn't put my K-State one up for you guys, but here we go.
It's purple.
Yeah.
It's good enough.
Well, speaking of purple, we were talking about this before we started the show today. K-State is a kind of cool, unique situation. One color. There's not this 2 or 3 colors most have. Yes, white is obviously part of it, and there's some black here and there, but the official color is Kansas State purple. And tell us a little bit about that. You had a funny story about that.
Well, I think K-State should have demanded when TCU came in that they should change their color. They use black a lot. They could use black with purple highlights, but purple's a lane that's already filled. And now Arizona's showing up, and gosh, it's Wildcats. And I'm like, okay, you guys got to change your names, but if you combine Bear Down with Wildcats, you end up with Bearcats, and you're still screwed.
Yeah, Cincinnati.
So, I don't know. Maybe you guys should just go with a completely different mascot altogether, but you can keep the red and blue. Nobody in the Conference of Substance uses that.
Of substance. We heard the guys down the river was how it was explained by Wyatt Thompson, voice of the Wildcats. So, yeah.
That's okay.
I love that. So Tim, we are just looking at every Big 12 opponent that Arizona will face in the future, whether it's this year or next. And, over the next couple of weeks, we're just getting insider information for Big 12 schools. Now, there's 3 schools that we know a ton about: Utah, Colorado, ASU, and of course, the Arizona Wildcats. But, we don't really know too much about Kansas State athletics. And you've been covering K-State for, when was your first year covering Kansas State?
Full-time 95.
Okay.
So I've been around for a lot of it.
So you saw the rise of the football program in the Bill Snyder era and everything. So you've been there to see it all happen.
An interesting story with that is one of my first jobs, well, really my first job, full-time job in media, I was in St. Joe, Missouri, working for the newspaper. And it's one of those moments where every moment you were there, you're thinking, why am I here? Eventually I got a job back in my hometown in Salina, Kansas. And that was 1989. And Bill Snyder was hired that year, and his hometown's St. Joe, Missouri. So it was when I finally got to covering the team full time, I could do some really interesting stuff with him, because when he talked about his old memories of St. Joe, I knew exactly where he was talking about, including down to the barbershop he used to go to. So
the connection we strive for. Wow. You had it on day one.
I did. I was destined, I guess, to cover Bill Snyder, but I'm pretty happy covering Chris Kleiman. They're both really good men.
Hearing the impact that Bill Snyder's had on Kansas State football, I equate it to kind of a similar impact to Lute Olson with Arizona basketball. Like when you think about Manhattan, Kansas, you think about Bill Snyder in Kansas State football. When you think about Tucson, Arizona, you think about Arizona basketball and the impact that Lute Olson's had. Am I in the same ballpark here, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm not fully up to speed on the history of Arizona basketball, but Bill Snyder didn't just take over a bad program. He took over the worst program. And every time Kansas State had flirted with success throughout its entire history, going back to the late 19th century, if a coach was good enough, they got rid of him or lost him. So every time they had an opportunity, they turned away from it. And really, Bill Snyder coming to Kansas State with the university president at the time, John Weefeld, was the first time K-State said, hell yeah, we're in. And it worked. They got the donors that stepped up and the right coach who literally worked a miracle. I mean, it was a mess. It was beyond bad. The facilities, the support, the players. I mean, it was bad. And it took him 5 years to get to a bowl game. I don't know if coaches get that anymore, but he was building something that was sustainable in a different era when you had to do it through recruiting. So it took a while.
I know he'll probably be on this list, but and granted, he didn't play at Kansas State, but he's definitely on the KSU Sports Mount Rushmore. Who else do you kind of put on that list? Modern days, we would see probably like a Darren Sproles, I'm assuming, but
right.
How do you fill out a top 4 of really the icons of Kansas State sports?
I've done this as an exercise in the past, but it's not easy.
It's
I mean,
not easy. No, we've
you
tried
got
it.
Rolando Blackman. I'm just going to stick with players. I might cheat at the end and put Snyder in. Rolando Blackman, probably from basketball. Mitch Richmond from basketball. And then you probably turn to Darren Sproles and maybe Michael Bishop, if not Jordy Nelson. Michael Bishop didn't have the NFL success, but he was he was that quarterback that every program needs to get to go to the next level and raise expectations and teach that locker room how to win. A lot of that was in place, but when Michael Bishop came in 97 and 98, he remains to this day the best football player I've ever seen in person.
We talked about this with Wyatt, and there's a couple guys that kind of get lost, I guess, in Kansas State lore, like Michael Beasley and also Colin Klein, the guy who I believe lost to Johnny Manziel for the Heisman. Where do those guys fit in?
They're way up there. Bees was only here for a year, but it was a great year. What a colorful character. I just saw some, the 3-man highlights, whatever that's called now, that league, him just torching everyone. He was in the Big 12 with Kevin Durant and others, and he was by far the best player. But he's had some rough life issues that haven't gone his way. And honestly, for a 19-year-old kid like Mike, who was struggling with maturity, getting to go to Miami as a rookie was not good for him. And I knew it was a bad fit, and it was.
Yeah.
Share with us a little bit about Manhattan. It was interesting getting to ask Wyatt about some of his favorite places, and I won't tell you what they are until you share yours, because we want to compare notes after. But it sounds like every bit a big time college town, which is one of the neat things about this interaction of melding these former Pac-12 schools into the Big 12. Is the Pac-12, as great as it was, and I'm a massive Pac-12 fan for a long time as a conference, but again, Los Angeles is Los Angeles. The Bay Area is the Bay Area. It's kind of neat to actually have a handful of true college towns that, even though Tucson is a relatively big city that people don't realize, it's over 1 million people, it's still, the university is the center of the city. Right. And we get the same impression with Manhattan. Kind of share with us what Manhattan's like, and then if you have any favorite restaurants, places to be. If there was an Arizona fan coming to visit for a game or two, where would you tell them to go? What would you tell them to experience?
Well, first of all, I'd tell them to come, because this is a very fun college town. It has, I've heard fans from another Pac-12 school that joined complaining about all, the backwater towns of Manhattan and Ames and Stillwater. I'm like, those are called college towns, and they're an absolute blast to go visit. And you tend to get really good football atmospheres and basketball out of it. But one of the unique things about Manhattan is it has a second downtown called Aggieville, which is right off the corner of campus. And it's essentially a bar district for the students. There's some stores and restaurants down there, but it's where the students go to gather. And like I said, it is directly off the southeast corner of campus. And so a lot of students can just walk to it, but that's kind of the epicenter of student life along with the campus. And then there's a separate downtown with, more adult restaurants, but they don't all fit those classifications. So my favorite restaurant is in Aggieville. It's called Taco Lucha. It is it's really cool. I mean, you just kind of got to go there. It's worth the wait. It's a small place. And, I've been told 3-hour wait before. You get to go into a little corral and where you can drink out there, and it only was 2 hours. It's a tiny restaurant. They flip it really fast. Cool patio. Its sister restaurant that predated it is called So Long Saloon. They share the kitchen. I would recommend that for burgers. But if you're going downtown, Wine Dive, Bourbon and Baker are really nicer places, but it's a casual town, but they'd be on the upper end of the dining experience. It's and if you want to get after it in Aggieville, there's plenty of college bars if you want to pretend you're 22 years old again. I got news for you, though. The students can tell you're not. They know. Even if in spirit you're 22, you're not.
Can't keep up.
So last year I did this series called This Isn't Tucson. And whenever I hit the road, I would try out restaurants that really just defined that town.
Yeah.
So Aggieville is the place that I should hit up, or is are there like cool restaurants, or is it just a place to,
Hmm.
get some drinks and have some fun?
Well, I mean, there's a nice sports bar right across the street from them called Tanner's. There's a more adult bar called Annie Mae's that's down in the basement. It's got a cool speakeasy vibe to it, even though it's never been that. It's also the Aggieville tornado shelter. So you just all
Wow.
run to one of the smallest bars if a tornado hits, and you can keep drinking. Very Aggieville right there. I would say Taco Lucha is probably the definitive experience now for the modern day version of Kansas State, Aggieville, and people coming to town. It's quite a cool little place. It's got a cool vibe, great service. And like I said, you can sit out there and, in Kansas, it's kind of like Arizona. It's going to be 100 degrees, but you're under some shade and have a beer. There's no open container in Manhattan. Keep that in mind. You can't take a drink from bar to bar, but they have now created corrals. Literally, that's what they look like for you to stand in or sit in and drink. And it's worked out pretty well. But I'd say Taco Lucha. It's all kinds of luchadora masks around and Mexican themed. It's kind of a cool Mexican, but just incredible tacos. Just amazing.
Because last year, the first road trip that I went on was at Mississippi State in Starkville.
Mhm.
And I asked the guy, I'm like, or one of the guys who lives in Starkville, I'm like, where can I get a good place to eat? And he said, well, we got this really good Mexican food place. And I'm like, man, I'm from Tucson, Arizona. I don't think there's a place within 500, 600 miles that's going to rival anything that we got. So is Taco Lucha anything that we can get in Tucson, Arizona? That's a high bar to set.
Well, I know it's one of those places that it's a taco place, but not really, even though it's Mexican themed. It's kind of, I don't want to say California Thai. It's just really fresh ingredients. Yeah, maybe you won't be impressed by that, but if you go next door to So Long Saloon, you'll be impressed by the burgers, even though everyone get those. They do a pretty special job, but it's neat. Those two places are connected by their kitchen, different doors, but both different vibes, both very cool places run by local restaurateurs.
Speaking of Mississippi State, one thing that I thought was very fascinating to me was the fans would trek hours to go to a football game because there's not a lot of people that live in Starkville.
Nope.
What is it like in Manhattan? Are there a lot of people who live there, or is the majority of the fan base coming to games traveling from 2 hours out?
Yep, they are. Manhattan's 50K plus the students, so 70K. So yeah, there's not much help from the locals. You only get so much help, and when you're dealing with a college town, you might have professors who are not engaged in athletics, and we're also a military town adjacent to Fort Riley, so we have a lot of military personnel who aren't necessarily connected to the school. So the core of the fan base would travel from Kansas City to the west, or to the east, which is 2 hours away approximately, and Wichita to the south a little bit. That's about 2 hours away. And of course, Topeka and Manhattan and Salina, my hometown, are all in that stretch, Junction City, where Fort Riley is. But we've got people coming from Western Kansas for every game. We're talking a 5-hour journey.
Wow.
For every home game. So
that's dedication.
Tailgating at K-State's pretty cool because there's a lot of campers. They come in and they can park the night before, and they just kind of hang out there. Huge parking lots at K-State, so tailgating's pretty epic.
Tell us a little bit about the traditions. You brought up Bear Down to us about that's a big Tucson thing, and how that came up back in the early 20th century. John Button Salmon, captain of the football team and the baseball team, student body president, was in a car accident, and as he was on his deathbed, he told a coach, Pop McHale, to tell, the exact phrase roughly was tell them to bear down. That is developed into the fight song and all kinds of other elements here. But tell us a little bit about K-State's traditions. I know a little bit about the Wabash Cannonball and what that has visually. It's really cool to watch on TV. I'm excited to get to see it in person at some point down the line. But walk us through some others, or that, if that's the one to keep an eye on. Yeah, EMA. We were talking about that with Wyatt as well.
Yep, every man a Wildcat. We're a little vague on where that came from. A lot of it came out of the 1960s. Purple Pride was something that was around for a while. That's gotten pretty cliche, but Vince Gibson was a coach here that gave K-State its first kind of post-World War II, not exactly, but more modern era of winning by going 6-5, and it was celebrated. And so a lot of that grew out of that. But yeah, the Wildcat is not as full bodied as your Wildcat. It's supposed to be half man, half Wildcat. So it's a Wildcat head and a human body, which is kind of odd to think about. So you can be critical of that. The Wabash story, though, is really interesting. I don't know if Wyatt shared it with you, but the band university of the band used to be in, all the music was in Nichols Hall.
It
Now
burnt down, right?
Over my shoulder right there, you can see We Want a Field House. That photo is from Nichols Hall in the early 40s. And those students, I love the picture because those, Daphne, thank you. Those dudes either served in World War II or just barely missed it. And they got a Hearn Field House built. But the band stayed there in Nichols, and in the 1960s, during the tumultuous times, an arson has burned it to the ground. Well, not to the ground, to the shell, the castle-like shell. All the sheet music was in there. Everything, the instruments were in there. And they had a basketball game coming up, and the band director had a copy of the Wabash Cannonball, a song that they hadn't really played. And he worked it up with the band, with kids borrowing instruments, and they put together a pep band that just played it on end during the next game. And it's been a tradition ever since. And it's quite the spectacle to watch the student body bob and weave to the Wabash Cannonball.
And it was the only piece of music that didn't burn because he had it elsewhere or something like that. Yeah.
That's the story. It might be total crap, but that's what we're going with because people have lined up the dates. Hold on, the fire was here and this game was here. So that is the legend of the Cannonball, but it grew out of that.
It's funny you say that because I'm going to probably get myself run out of Tucson for this, but I've always wondered the veracity of the John Button Salmon claims over the years. It's very much a movie script, and that doesn't mean I don't think it happened, but like all the nuances that get put together. But it's a great story, and it's created great traditions here, and as it sounds like that has there. So I'll go with it. I'm open to it as an outsider for sure.
My final words will be right back. I'm going to go grab a beer.
From Taco Lucha.
Yeah, that's less catchy than Bear Down.
I love it. Tim, how would you rank the hierarchy of sports at Kansas State?
That's a great question. Because this was a basketball school. It was up until Bill Snyder's arrival, and some of the olds, that remember the traditions of, I'm certainly from the Jack Hartman era, working the student newspaper when Lon Kruger was hired to replace Jack Hartman. But, some fans go back further than that, when Cotton Fitzsimmons or Tex Winter were the coaches. This was a basketball school. Final Fours, a lot of Sweet 16s and Elite Eights. And Lon Kruger saw the writing on the wall. He felt the shift with Bill Snyder getting that college football momentum. And honestly, it never had visited K-State. And then the fever caught on with the 1993, ironically, Copper Bowl played in the stadium right there in Tucson. Wow. And that was the monumental moment for K-State, where I think everyone realized football was alive when there was about 50,000 K-Staters at a pep rally in Tucson. And well, fraction of that, but that's how many showed up for the game. So yeah, I mean, from that moment on, and Bill Snyder just kept winning. Michael Bishop showed up, got to the cusp of a national championship, the first of a few finalists for the Heisman Trophy. And the players just kept coming, and a lot of them from Kansas, which is interesting. But yeah, it kind of switched, and now Jerome Tang is the guy. Bruce Weber was here for 10 years. He won a Big 12 title. He went to an Elite Eight, but it never quite caught fire. And Jerome Tang's really brought that basketball tradition back to a forefront and has embraced it. So it's going to be interesting. I think there's high expectations in both sports. And honestly, it's been rare to have a time when K-State enjoyed success in football and men's basketball in the same year. 2012-13 would have been the main year, because they also won the Big 12 titles in both sports and baseball that year. But football was so bad. Basketball could be great for 20 years straight, and football wouldn't have offered any help to match it.
When you couple that with the school down the river, it kind of like Indiana, is basketball king to where it just bleeds all the way down to even the youth and the high school levels?
Yeah. Kansas basketball has had an enormous impact on a lot of youth, particularly Kansas City. I always say this, I mean this as a compliment. The Kansas Jayhawks are the professional franchise of Kansas City. In the fact that if you're just someone who wants to be a basketball fan and there's no NBA, you gravitate to the school that's 30, 45 minutes away and has a huge presence, a huge fan base in Kansas City. What Bill Self has done, building upon, the success of the coaches before him, has been absolutely incredible. But as I've said, K-State's reached up to visit that, while KU has absolutely stunk in football. Now they seem to be getting going. This could be the greatest combined year for both of those sports at both schools ever, based on what we think these four teams will be about.
Wow.
I think I'm tapped out, Justin.
All good? Yeah.
Tim has led us down the path to, I said this to Wyatt when we were building a sort of a prototype of what this series is going to look like. Kansas State being one of the first ones we're doing. That's what I used for the prototype. And I just sort of threw the headline on the page just as a filler, the Little Apple, a big time college town. But everything you and Wyatt has shared with us totally makes that true. It sounds like a heck of a place, and heck of a place to be a student, heck of a place to live and work like you get to, and hopefully on our end to visit soon enough to get to experience this. And through, I think we mentioned this earlier, through the death of the Pac-12 as we know it, there's some sadness, but the excitement is the newness of some of these things we're talking about. So I'm excited from it, and for our audience, our readership. We're unbiased as reporters in this context, but at the same time, we think we can be excited about new things and sharing new locales and sharing Taco Lucha with our audience. So.
Heck
okay,
yeah,
can I get a question answered from you guys?
Sure.
So we host a show called Big 12 Insiders. We just ranked the best home field advantages in the new 12, as I call it. But if you just take stadium quality, aesthetics, rank the four Pac-12 teams coming in for me in who has the most aesthetically pleasing setting/stadium.
So I would go, Justin, do we want to both give ours? I would say Utah Stadium was the Olympic Stadium back in 2002 for the Winter Olympics. Rice Eccles is a very solid stadium with beautiful views. I think newness, it's going to be Sun Devil Stadium, but it's a little more sterile than it used to be. It had more character when you didn't have this big, what they call it, the innovation corridor, which is all these, State Farm headquarters and all these things separating Tempe Town Lake, which is a river that had dried up that they pumped water into to create sort of this lake setting, but it was still beautiful. Still saw Camelback Mountain and all this stuff. But then they were forced to put a few $100 million into it. Because it was falling apart. They had to for structural purposes, and it's fine, but it doesn't have the same feel, in my opinion, that it used to. Colorado, it because they were part of the Big 12 more recently than any of these others. But beautiful stadium or beautiful setting. I think the stadium needs some work. They're finally realizing. Tucson is such a weird situation with Arizona Stadium. It's been known that it needs a lot of work for a long time, but depending what time of day, depending what part of the stadium you're in, you could be happy sitting there for 5 hours and feel very pleased and not feel like you're missing anything. It's just that it's a lot of piecemealed eras create one setting. And I think that's probably the biggest issue with what they call the old gray lady is it's missing some pieces. So that would be my order, would probably be Utah and some 2A, 2B of ASU and Colorado for different reasons. I think Colorado's setting is different. It's more historical. But it also is older and needs more work, just like Tucson and Arizona Stadium does.
I have a feeling the press box is exactly the same when I was last in it.
At Colorado?
Uh-huh.
Yeah. What do you think, Justin? What's your order?
They all have things that are better than the other one. I think altogether, Utah is number one just because they sell out every single game. That's been the case in the Kyle Whittingham era. So they sell out every single game, no matter what time of day it is, no matter how cold it is. People pack Rice Eccles Stadium.
Yep.
And then Colorado, when you think about Run, Ralphie, Run, if you get a game that's in the middle of the afternoon in Boulder, like it is beautiful. And a lot of people go to their games, even though they stink. Even when they're going 1-11, they still go to a lot of the games. ASU has maybe the best grass in the Pac-12, now Big 12. Their groundskeepers they do such a phenomenal job of maintaining their grass. It's always pristine. Arizona is such a weird one. I would have to agree with Brett. I would probably put Arizona towards the bottom, but I mean, there's not any issues with Arizona Stadium that I think makes them one of the worst venues in the Big 12. I still think it's really high quality. The facility, the Lowell Stevens football facility is great. The big video board at the end of the north side or the south side, it's great. I don't know, but like Brett said, I just think that it needs some work done. The old gray lady, as they call it.
And it needs some cohesion. That was kind of what I was trying to get at and feeding off Justin. Is like I said, it's a lot of different eras. The west side was built at a different era than the east side. The north side is the newest. And most of that, while there's good seats there, it's behind an end zone. And it's also a part of the area where it's student athlete focused. So that's amazing that the athletes love it. The locker rooms are great. The training facilities are great. Everything in that is great, but it's not customer focused. It's not fan focused. And then you got the press box, which was built in a different era, the Jumbotron. I mean, it really is this piecemeal thing. And I keep saying the number one problem with Arizona Stadium that, could probably get them. And I'm not talking if there's structural issues. I don't know that. But if there aren't, if structurally it's fine, the number one problem that I think could actually increase your fan base and get you another 10 years in a financial situation that U of A and other schools are going through without having to do a massive remodel. And I don't know how much it would cost. I'm going to throw a number out there. Is put $15 million down and put chair backs in the entire stadium. It's the bleacher seating in 60% of the stadium to me is the biggest negative of Arizona Stadium. It's tough. Some of them on the curves have backs to the bleachers, so at least you can lean on something. But to sit there for even the newer era of faster paced football, but to sit there in the Rich Rodriguez era where they were going 100 offensive plays a game. And you're talking 4-hour plus games sitting on steel bleachers for that long. It just wasn't fun, but there's so much else that's beautiful. The setting's beautiful. The mountains are beautiful. The late night, Pac-12 after dark elements were great, but that to me is the number one thing is put chair backs. People can handle cramped bathrooms if they feel comfortable when they're sitting in their seats.
You're right. It's interesting because Bill Snyder Family Stadium has been piecemealed, but they've done an incredible job at tying it all together. This conference is pretty competitive in terms of facilities, and it's I think that was probably set by Oklahoma and Texas in some ways, but actually Texas has some pretty crappy facilities until they just built their new basketball arena. So it's pretty intense.
The Irwin Center, that was a missile silo. It felt like you look at that building from the outside, but the new one's great. And it's, and then it's so fascinating to think, I know Texas is leaving the conference, but to think that you can have settings like the Moody Center in one city in the conference, and then places like the Octagon or Fog Allen, it's such different across the board. All three very different from each other.
Yeah, the new arena for Baylor, horrible camera angles. You'll get seasick watching that, but that's cool because they're.
Is it one of those vertical looks? Like Boise State in the tournament.
Yes, it's like a moonshot from the camera.
I didn't know that.
Because it's not real big. I'm not sure what the capacity is, but it goes up high on the sides, so you're kind of looking down on the court. But when they won the national championship, they're playing in a dump. One of those old roundhouses. That this is amazing that it got really competitive towards the last 10 years of the Big 12 to try to keep up. And
I can imagine.
Kansas State just opened a brand new volleyball arena, and it's just ongoing. It's just never stopped. But now with everything going on in athletics, it's going to be hard to pay for many facilities for a little bit.
Kansas State has its own arena for volleyball.
Yeah.
Wow.
Most of the facilities, except of course with the rowing venue, which is out at the lake, are right there all together. I mean, Bramlage Coliseum sits at the south end of the football stadium. And then right to the direct west of that is the new volleyball arena. An Olympic training facility runs down that side of the parking lot, attached to the volleyball, behind which is the outfield wall for the baseball stadium. The track is kind of tucked in there behind Bramlage Coliseum a little bit. It's all pretty much right there. So
wow.
And Bramlage, the Octagon of Doom, which is such a great nickname.
it's
so
great.
Good.
Did we ask about the Wildcat hand sign, Brett?
We did not. That should be the last question here. So do you know, Tim, both U of A and KSU both use this hand sign? The mascot at Kansas State is Willie. The mascot at Arizona is Wilbur. I mean, this is a lot of that Spider-Man meme pointing at each other here. And but do you know much about the genesis of the hand sign? Because when you talk to people here in Tucson, they think they created it. And when we read online, Kansas State folks think they created it. And I kind of think it's one of those things that just gelled out of midair and both had it at the same time, probably. I'm being sarcastic.
Well,
but
if I've read that Arizona started using it a year before, but I don't think K-State I didn't even know Arizona did it. Nobody seemed to know Arizona did it until this all came up. I don't even know where it came from. I think it was just a student.
I don't even know where it came from in Tucson, to be honest. It just sort of showed up.
Well, you join the Southwest Conference where everyone has a hand signal, and the Bears, and it's just, guns up or whatever. Everyone had something. You got this, which you're not supposed to do. I mean, hopefully it won't be a penalty in the future if you do this because they're gone. But yeah, no, it just kind of showed up, and it's, the WC. People think it also looks like the PowerCat, the emblem, the Wildcat emblem.
I love the fact it's called the PowerCat, though. The fact your logo has a name is
we don't know where it came from either.
The PowerCat, the name PowerCat?
Where the actual logo came from, yeah, it was designed. But nobody knows.
Because that's on the K-State websites. It says the PowerCat logo. And
nobody knows.
PowerCat is now trademarked. Like, that's the name of the logo. It's great.
Yeah, where it came from. And this is an interesting backstory. I started originally with a magazine, PowerCat Illustrated, in 1998 when we started up our own company. So I hired a trademark attorney out of Colorado, and he said, PowerCat's not trademarked. I'm like, what? He goes, you want to trademark it and you can own it? I said, no, the university needs that. So I referred them to it. So I think they just let me use it now. But yeah, it just was really organic where the PowerCat came from. But nobody knows exactly when it came up. It was just the Wildcat logo for so long that Bill Snyder commissioned to have done by a local artist. And yeah, some of the early versions of it are hideous, but they had whiskers. No, not whiskers, but yeah, it was, but yeah, it's just another part of the traditions that those are traditions.
Yeah.
When they might have a story, but as we've discussed, it might be total BS, but they're very organic. You can't just, just say, hey, we're going to start some new traditions. Well, that's not how traditions work. So it's fun how college traditions just kind of grow out of stuff, and they might have a legend, but you're really not sure if that legend is true.
Well, I'm starting a tradition. Whenever Kansas State and Arizona plays in my game story, I'm calling them the PowerCats. It's the hardest game story ever.
That's not a bad idea.
That's what Wyatt, we were talking to Wyatt about this, is how is he going to handle the balancing? He said when basketball played Villanova, I guess a year or two ago or a couple of years ago, he said he was kind of dealing with that, Wildcats and Wildcats. Yeah. PowerCats is a cool, not that we need you guys to change your names. We're not trying to do that. But that's a great name.
Kansas State PowerCats.
Wild Bears is on the table. I'm just saying Wild Bears is on the table.
I love it. That is Tim Fitzgerald. He is the Kansas State insider for 247sports.com. He is joining us for the Big 12 Blitz. It is a part of our series on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app, where we get all the insider information for every Big 12 opponent that Arizona will face, not just this year, but for many years to come. Tim, thank you so much for being a part of this. It was a great time. We appreciate it, man.
Okay, hit me up if you're coming to town for the game.
Will do. See you in September.
Thanks, Tim.